Before there were sails, before rudders, before maps or metal, before the first city ever rose from the dust, there was only wind and water and firelight flickering against the bark of fallen trees. The world was raw, untamed, and vast. Waves whispered against endless shores where no human had yet dared to journey. In that silence, at the edge of the unknown, a few of our ancestors looked toward the sea, not with fear, but with wonder. Imagine the darkness of the prehistoric night, the hiss of a log sliding into the surf, the crackle of embers catching in the wind, the heartbeat of the tide against stone. The earth was colder then, the stars closer, and every horizon was an ending. But endings have a way of calling to us. Somewhere, beneath the sound of fire and waves, a question stirred in the human mind. What lies beyond the water's edge? What could we become if we dared to leave the shore? This is the forgotten story of the first dreamers of the sea. The people who, armed only with stone tools, instinct, and imagination, built the world's first boats. They didn't just carve wood, they carved a path into the future. This isn't legend or myth, it's archaeology. It's proof that courage and curiosity were always part of us. Welcome to Prehistoric Shadows, where we journey back to the dawn of human vision, when a single spark and a fallen tree changed everything. 60,000 years ago, the world was colder, harsher, and quieter than the one we know. Ice crept down from the poles. Winds howled across open plains. The oceans pulled back, revealing wide stretches of land that connected continents now separated by sea. But for all that closeness, the ocean itself remained the final boundary, a blue wall that no one had yet learned to cross. Humanity lived close to firelight and forest, beside rivers that offered both danger and life. We had stone tools sharp enough to cut through bone and wood. We had language forming in our throats, gestures turning into meaning. We hunted, gathered, built shelters of branch and hide. We had everything we needed to survive everything except the ability to move beyond the land that birthed us. The earth was our cradle, but it was also our cage. To step beyond a stream or a lake was simple, but to cross a body of water that stretched into the horizon, to trust your life to something that floats, that demanded more than muscle. It demanded imagination. The land felt safe, the sea felt unknowable. Between them lay the first true human conflict, the comfort of what we knew versus the call of what we could become. Archaeologists studying the ancient islands of Wallacea, in what is now Southeast Asia, have found traces of that moment when curiosity met courage. They uncovered bones of deep-sea fish tuna, shark, and barracuda species that live far from shore. They found fragments of tools used to strip and twist plant fibers into rope. These were not the marks of people trapped on land. These were the fingerprints of sailors before history began. And perhaps it all started with something simple, a floating branch, a child clinging to driftwood, a hunter watching it glide across a current. Somewhere, someone must have wondered, if water can carry a tree, could it carry us? Somewhere, long before cities, before metal, before words had edges, someone stood beside a river and noticed something remarkable. A branch had fallen into the current. It didn't sink. It drifted, turning slowly in the water, gliding on the surface like it was alive. Children played nearby, clinging to bits of bark and laughing as the current carried them a few feet downstream before bumping into the shore. The tribe watched. The hunters watched. They saw the way wind and water worked together, the way the log floated, how it rose and fell with the waves. And in that moment, the question returned, if water can hold a tree, could it hold us? They didn't call it engineering. They didn't have that word. But that is exactly what it was. The first experiments in human innovation weren't done with metal or measurement. They were done with hands and memory, with patience and failure. A log that was too small flipped over. A bundle of reeds floated high but sank under weight. Bark peeled, cracked, and broke apart. Through trial and error, our ancestors began to understand the hidden rules of buoyancy, the relationship between shape, weight, and water. Some woods absorbed water and grew heavy. Others resisted it. Over time, they learned which trees were trustworthy: fig, palm, acacia species that were light, flexible, and abundant. Even without formulas or physics, they learned through experience what modern science later confirmed. Those woods have low density and excellent buoyancy. On the islands of Wallacea, ancient humans shaped these trees using stone tools carved from obsidian and flint. They burned the center of the trunk, scraping away the charred wood with a stone adze, hollowing it slowly, day by day. When it was done, the shape was simple, a curved body of wood that floated strong and true. The world's first dugout canoe had been born. A single log had become more than wood. It had become a vessel. It had become the shape of human will. Once a tree had been hollowed and shaped, the true craft began. The builders, men, women, and children worked together, their hands dark with resin and ash. They sealed every crack with a mixture of sap, mud, and crushed charcoal. Fibers, stripped from tree bark, were twisted into ropes, strong and flexible. These cords lashed the frame tight, binding strength into every curve. In places where the wood split, they pressed in resin until it glistened like amber in the light of the fire. What began as a log was now something alive, waterproofed, balanced, and ready to meet the tide. Without knowing it, they had discovered the foundations of marine engineering. They didn't have rulers or geometry, but they understood balance. They had no blueprints, yet they could read the language of form. They studied how fish cut through the current, long, slender, and tapered at both ends, and they mimicked that grace in wood. A boat too wide would drag, too narrow, and it would tip. But in between lay harmony, the delicate middle ground between stability and motion. They didn't measure by inches, they measured by instinct. The techniques they used, binding wood with fiber, sealing it with resin, echo through time. Thousands of years later, the same principles reappeared in the balangay boats of the Philippines. These vessels, built between the 7th and 10th centuries, used planks lashed together with plant fiber instead of nails. It was the same logic born in prehistory. Flexibility was strength. Rope could absorb shock. Wood could breathe. Even across millennia, the knowledge endured. And like all great crafts, it was taught not by lecture, but by sight and repetition. A boy learned by watching his father notch the hull. A girl learned by wrapping the ropes and feeling their tension. The memory of how to make a boat was not written down, it lived in the hands of those who built them. Even today, echoes of that ancient wisdom survive among the Sama Bajo, the sea nomads of Southeast Asia. They are born on boats, live on boats, die on boats. For them, the sea is not a barrier, it is home. They carry within them a memory older than history itself. Every vessel they launch is more than a tool. It is a lesson carved into the collective memory of humanity. As generations passed, humans began to adapt their boats to the landscapes that surrounded them. In places where tall trees were scarce, they turned to what the earth and water offered: bamboo, reeds, driftwood. They lashed these materials together with sinew and vine, creating rafts light enough to carry yet strong enough to endure a current. In calm lakes, they wove reed bundles into sleek, curved shapes that cut across the surface, much like the reed boats still seen today on Lake Titicaca in South America. Thousands of miles apart, separated by oceans and ages, people reached the same conclusion. The principles of water and balance were universal. Civilization, it seemed, was converging on the same truths. Then came a breakthrough that would forever change the rhythm of travel: the outrigger. By attaching a smaller, secondary hull to the main body, early sailors discovered a perfect balance between speed and stability. The twin-hull design danced with the waves instead of fighting them, allowing longer journeys, heavier loads, and confidence in the open sea. It was no longer about surviving the water, it was about mastering it. Archaeological evidence tells us that over 50,000 years ago, humans reached Australia by sea. They could not have simply drifted there by chance. The voyages required skill, timing, and purpose. Across what is now Indonesia, ancient communities in Sulawesi and Nusa Tenggara built and refined their vessels, moving island to island with knowledge passed down like an heirloom. The sea, once a wall, became a bridge. That bridge would one day stretch across entire oceans. The same ingenuity that hollowed the first tree would evolve into the great maritime traditions of Southeast Asia: the lashed lug plank boats, the mighty Kunlun Po, and the legendary Samudra Raksa that retraced ancient trade routes from Indonesia to Africa. Those prehistoric vessels carried more than people. They carried the beginning of exchange, the birth of trade, and humanity's unending desire to go farther than before. In the heart of the forest, a clearing opened beneath a canopy of stars. A fire burned at its center, painting the trunks of trees in amber light. Children gathered resin from bark, their small hands sticky with sap. The elders sang in low voices, their chants rising and falling with the crackle of the flames. The adults bent over the vessel, tightening the final bindings, sealing the seams with ash and mud. The air smelled of smoke, earth, and salt. In that moment, the boat was no longer just wood and rope, it was a promise. For those who built it, launching a vessel was not only a task of survival, it was a ritual, a passage of belief. The first voyage marked more than distance traveled. It marked transformation. To push a boat into the tide was to surrender to forces greater than oneself, to trust the unseen, to hope that the horizon held life instead of loss. The boat became a symbol of faith, of hope, of the courage to step beyond what was known. From that moment, humanity changed. The anthropologists would say it was the birth of navigation, but in truth, it was the birth of vision. From the instant we chose to leave the shore, we were no longer creatures of the land, we became creatures of imagination. Archaeologists still trace those footsteps today. 43,000 years ago, humans left their prints on the islands of Nusa Tenggara. 50,000 years ago, others reached the coast of Australia by sea. These journeys were not accidents of drift, they were acts of intent, of planning, of courage. They marked the beginning of exploration, the first time our species looked at an obstacle and saw a path instead. The boat, the hollowed tree, the sealed crack of resin, it was more than a tool. It was humanity's first machine, proof that we could touch our limits and redraw the map of what was possible. Before the wheel, before the plow, before the first city rose from the dust, there was the boat, the earliest proof that humanity could rise above fear. The people who carved those vessels did not just cross water, they crossed the boundaries of their own imagination. They turned the unknown into direction, the impossible into distance. Every paddle that struck the surface of the sea was a heartbeat of courage. From that moment forward, the ocean was no longer a prison. It became a path. What had once divided the world began to connect it. Each wave that broke against the shore carried more than foam, it carried the memory of every ancestor who dared to push away from land. The sound of the tide is their voice. The shimmer of the horizon is their dream. The sea became a mirror of our own spirit, restless, searching, endless. So, if you ever find yourself by the water, listening to the hiss of waves or the whisper of wind through the trees, remember this. Within those sounds lives the memory of our species, the courage, the craft, and the curiosity that made us who we are. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows, where the past is not silent, it breathes, it moves, it waits to be rediscovered. Where myth meets fact, and shadows speak. Until next time, stay curious.